If you're just joining us, you're listening to Recruiting Roundtable as part of Ready to Play Week here on 1510 AM. You can text READY to 26989 to help us provide summer camp activities for kids here in Kansas City that have been impacted by COVID-19. Kevin, you talked about how kids are sometimes it's about getting creative for the kids as well as for the coaches. And Gabe made the point that coaches are going to find that they're adapting, that they're not missing out on much because of their ability to change directions. I want to pose a question to both Jon and to Ryan. As guys that cover recruiting in the state of Kansas, a much more rural state, has been called by Roy Williams and a lot of other people flyover country. The role of camps and combines and stuff like that sometimes is overstated. When you guys talk about the recruiting that the respective programs you cover do in-state, how much has that in-state recruiting been impacted by the loss of the kind of events, whether it's on-campus camps that KU and K-State would typically be hosting, or other showcases throughout the state that might elevate a name, one of those late-blooming juniors or seniors that they hadn't heard of before? How much is the loss of those kind of events impacting recruiting at KU and K-State? Jon, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, Randy, it does, because, Kansas, we always like to talk. I know Ryan's probably the same, but, with our fan base, there's always that emphasis on the local kid, hey, why didn't this guy has an offer? Or, Colorado State offered him, who's next? Well, if that kid is on that bubble and he's a linebacker and he's listed at 6'3", 215, those coaches, like Kevin had said earlier, they want to verify, is he really 6'3", 215, or is he 6'1", 200, which, hey, in that world, I know some people say, does that really make a big difference? Well, to those college guys, yeah, it does. They really put a lot of emphasis on that. Well, in this, what we're going through right now, the coaches aren't allowed to see those kids. They're not allowed to verify. And I talked a little earlier about April and May is usually when they get a chance to go out and do an evaluation period in high schools across the country or the state, and they get to eyeball them, and they can say, yeah, this kid really is the size that he is. We love this film. He matches the size. Let's offer. But now I think what you're seeing is some kids that are in that category are getting slow played a little, because coaches want to make sure that before they give that offer out, that they are what they say they are. So, I think the fact that you can't see the kid in person in a camp, and I'll even go one step further, even an unofficial visit. If a kid lived in, Wichita, he could drive to Manhattan. He could be in Lawrence and just do a little day tour like they've always done in the past in the summertime. And those are out right now too. So it's not even just evaluating someone in camp. It's also being around them and getting a chance to meet their parents, like on an unofficial visit during the summertime. Those are out now too.
Wallace, what do you think?
Well, I think, just again, echoing a lot of what's already been said, but I think, highlighting Kansas in particular, I do agree that, the guys that are a little bit younger that most colleges would get a head start on now are kind of the ones that are being hurt. But particularly in the Sunflower State for the 2021 football class, this is filled with tweeners. It's a lot of guys that are projects that are, might have potential. The upside might be there, but it's not full of the Graham Mertzes, Turner Corcorans, Kai Thomases, all these guys like we've seen in the last two classes that have been, exactly what you expected them to be. Both, from a high school rank and into, their high school ranking or rating. So if you look at like the top 10 right now and 24/7, just from the state of Kansas alone, you can look at guys. Tank Young at St. Thomas Aquinas is a guy that I'm sure many coaches like K-State and KU would love to have up and be able to get a verified height on him. Is he too small? Christian Hawk, Zach Dower, Harlan Obioha is a guy from Hoxie out in western Kansas that, he's been the attention of, national writers because he's this 8-man kid that's 6'11", 300 pounds. But I'm sure the coaches at KU and K-State are saying, well, we'd love to have him up to be able to see what he can do against hand-picked competition. Because I think that's one thing with Kansas. We're all biased. We think Kansas football is maybe better than national people believe it to be. But at the same time, if you're K-State, KU, Missouri, Nebraska, and you're recruiting a Kansas kid, you want to be able to see what they can do against hand-picked competition. A kid like Hadley Panzer last year, K-State brought up, and he's from Lakin, Kansas. They wanted to see him go against defensive linemen that were more like Big 12 defenders that he might see. He ended up proving himself, got an offer, and he'll be with the team beginning this fall. But a lot of these other kids that I named, Christian Hawks from Norton, those are guys that I think a lot of coaches would really relish in seeing compete against hand-picked competition, and they're just not going to have, that luxury again this season.
We've taken some time to talk a little bit about how things have been impacted by the COVID virus to this point. Let's try looking ahead now. When recruiting finally does open back up and coaches are able to get out on the road, which is going to be complicated because of the fact that the time when recruiting opens up is going to be about the same time that maybe practice and workouts is going to be starting to ramp up on campus. It makes things difficult for those staffs as well as for the kids. What can we expect at that point? What can recruits expect from recruiting once we finally get back to sports in the college football realm and college basketball realm? Gabe, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think they can expect a mess, honestly. Like you said, it's going to be hard on coaches. Every time I talk about this, I say, I don't care if it's hard for coaches. They make $4 million a year. It's supposed to be hard. It doesn't bother me at all. But these kids, what they're going to get now is 20 phone calls. Hey, man, I know you committed to school X, but you haven't seen our place, and now you can. And come see it. Like, don't shut us down. Come see this. You are going to see just looting of commitment lists across the country. And there is a food chain, as anybody will tell you in these sports. You've got Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, those schools at the top of it. So what happens, they take who they want, and then let's say they take a kid from a Missouri or a Kansas State or a Nebraska. Well, then Missouri or Kansas State or Nebraska has to go take a kid from another school, like a Houston or a Memphis or something like that. And then Memphis goes and takes somebody from another school. And so it trickles down. I think, and I've said this for months, I think we're going to see more decommitments than we have ever seen in recruiting, because I think these kids are going to think about the cool part of recruiting, right? It's being treated like a king 5 times, going on official visits and being fed, and there is never going to be one day in these kids' lives where people like them as much as they like them on those 5 official visits and when they make that choice. And I don't begrudge kids for living it up. If anybody would have recruited me to do anything when I was 17 years old, I would have taken 5 visits and I would have loved it. Nobody did. So, but what you're going to see is these kids get into October and say, I know I said Missouri was my dream school, or I said Arkansas was my dream school, or Michigan was my dream school, but boy, it'd be kind of fun to go check out LSU and South Carolina and Michigan State and Wisconsin. So I'm going to go take these visits, and you're going to have a whole – I think you've almost got to eliminate the early signing period. I think it's – I don't see any point in it. I think they should skip it and just put everything back in February, which frankly I think they should do anyway, because I think it's a waste of time, and I think they should just have one.
You've made no bones about the fact that you think the 2 signing periods, the early signing period, is just kind of a mess. Do you think that this situation could lead to those kind of changes?
Well, I've always said if you want to have 2, put the first one in June or July, right? Where the kids, you don't get any official visits. You know where you want to go? Cool. Go there and sign there, and you're done with it. But December just, it's 7 weeks. What's the point? It doesn't really change all that much. And the last couple of years, we've had kids who have signed in December, but they don't announce it till February I don't like anything about it. If you're going to have it early, have it in the summer.
Kevin, let's get your thoughts on this now. What do you see happening once recruiting and everything opens back up?
Well, college basketball recruiting is different because you don't have, quote unquote, decommitment season in general. Guys typically make their commitments and they stick with it. And it's a lot more rare to see decommitments. Guys usually they have their minds made up. At this point, we haven't seen sort of a rash of basketball commitments just yet. It hasn't gotten to that point. To Gabe's point, the early signing period in basketball is so far set away from the late signing period that it works out the way that he's talking about. You have the guys who know where they want to go and they can go there in November. They can make that decision. And then you have the late signing period in the late spring. And so there's a very real gap there. And even beyond that, you're seeing some of the top guys going ahead and waiting to that period or even after that late signing period to make their decisions, because they hold all the cards and they want to see, is my coach going to be there? Is he not going to be there? Are they going to fill up this class with good players, or am I going to be the only guy headed there? And so there's a lot more. I think there's going to be a lot fewer decommitments at the college basketball level from a recruiting standpoint than there will be in college football. College football, I agree with Gabe. You can basically take everybody's names and throw them against a wall and just have to go to war for those guys all over again. Re-recruit all those guys all over again. But for basketball, I do think the fact that guys are taking their time more, it's a process that lends to players taking their time more anyway. I don't think you're going to see the rash decommitments. I do think it's going to be interesting to see when they are free to go and travel and see kids and all of that, what that format is. Are we going to have some sort of camp where they're able to go and see the top guys? Is it going to be a Team USA event like we have a lot of times for basketball guys who are top guys, where coaches can go and see all the top players? And for somebody who's maybe not recruiting off the top of that pile, somebody like a Wichita State, how are they going to find the guys, sort of just below that level who have the talent to develop the late bloomers and guys like that? I think that's the more interesting question when you look at college basketball, which is going to be quite different.
Kirby, is this going to be the winner of our decommitment?
I agree with Gabe on the football side, Randy. I just think that what you have a lot of now that's going on, the commitments are coming in left and right. I keep seeing them all over the place for every school. And I think a lot of kids are looking at this going, hey, I need to get my spot in line. I mean, we don't know what's going to go on with this COVID situation. We don't know when things are going to get opened back up, if they are. Let me get committed to a school so I know I have a home. And then if things open up and more options come available, then you can decommit. I mean, that's just the way of the world where this thing's gone over the last 5 to 10 years. You see so many decommitments every year now. So I think the players have said, let me get my spot in line and make my commitment. And then if something else comes along, I can open it up. So I agree with Gabe. I think if the coaches are allowed to get back on the road and the recruits are able to take official visits, I think it's going to be like the wild, wild west in November and December. So I think we're just setting up for a lot of stuff to do at the end of the year.
Jon, you say if coaches are able to get back on the road, do you think that we see an adjustment to the recruiting calendar so that there are more guys on the road during the season maybe than we have seen in past years, or in a typical year, I guess?
Well, when you talk to coaches, Randy, it seems like they like the early signing period. Number one, they get a lot of it out of the way. Okay, so they don't have to mess with as much in January. They save money on travel. I mean, if you sign 20 kids in December, you're not wasting a lot of time out there in January and money from the school flying around and trying to keep kids committed. You've already got them signed. So I think from a coach's perspective, they like the December. And what else happens is, Randy, is if a kid commits to you and he doesn't sign in early December, there's your warning bells that go off. So now hey, this kid didn't sign with us. We need to start looking somewhere else. So, I don't think that there's going to be any real changes. I've thought about August because, the last couple of years, they made August a dead period. They wanted the coaches to focus on their fall camp. They wanted the high school kids to focus on their fall camps. And they made August dead. So in recently they made that change. So I've wondered about August, that let's say they open up travel. Let's say, COVID numbers go down in places and they say, we're going to open it up. Do they change something in August which allows kids to make some visits then?
Interesting. Wallace, what do you think is going to happen when we finally get back to recruiting, get back to sports?
Well, I think it goes back to what most of the other guys have been saying just about decommitments. I mean, I look at a program like Minnesota, who's ranked top 15 right now. PJ Fleck has proven that his staff can sell kids on the idea of Minnesota. But if you look at their commitment list for 2021, only 2 kids are from Minnesota. So they're going to have to prove themselves that they can keep kids interested in Minnesota once things open back up. K-State has 4 kids committed to their 2021 class that committed to Coach Chris Kleiman sight unseen. They've never been to campus. So you wonder, are those guys first on your list to try and get up? I think it also comes down to coaching staffs being proactive. If Bill Snyder was still in charge of Kansas State, I would be sweating bullets a little bit more than I am with Chris Kleiman, because with Coach Kleiman's staff, it's literally a full group effort. Coach Kleiman is very involved. They're proactive. They know kind of who they're targeting to visit once things do open back up. And those kids have talked to a variety of coaches. So that whole get-to-know-you process will be out the door when those official visits come. Whereas back in the days with Bill Snyder, you had maybe 1 or 2 assistant coaches that were doing most of the legwork, and then you're meeting Bill Snyder for the first time on a visit. And there was a lot that went on into that. And one other thing that I wanted to touch on, Randy, going back to the Sunflower State, is I'll be interested to see. I think when it comes to Kansas kids, they're not going to be a top priority from a visit standpoint for K-State, for KU, a Nebraska, Oklahoma State, Missouri, any of those regional schools that typically, might reach out and say, hey, do you want to come take a visit? Because I think they're going to be so focused on getting the out-of-state guys in on visits that it's going to be kind of up to those local kids to make their work on their own. Find a weekend that works. Call a coach when you're en route to campus and say, hey, I think I'm going to stop by for an unofficial visit, because I think that most of the coaching staffs are just going to be too focused on the guys that are too far away to get up on their own. So I'll be interested to see how that affects the state of Kansas.
Ryan, kind of specific to Kansas State, Chris Kleiman's program, his heading into his second year there in Manhattan. Does a staff that has a reputation as being great evaluators of talent, coming from North Dakota State, where they were able to win national championship after national championship, mostly with players that were ignored by the FBS and Power 5 programs, do they kind of have a leg up when it comes to being able to evaluate kids just off of tape or just off of, coach's recommendations or having those relationships? Do they, in a situation like this where they're limited from getting out on the road, are they maybe one that's not going to see much difference in the way they do business every day?
I think it certainly helps them. I think you'll see it more, as the cycle carries on. I think the closer we get to signing day, you might see them benefit from that. Now, it's not going to, excite fans any, because a lot of those kids are not going to be highly rated, and so therefore it won't reflect in the class rankings. But I do think, when you listen to some of the things that Gabe was saying and Jon was saying, that there's going to be so much of that battling over kids that are already committed, that you're going to have a lot of guys fall through the cracks. And I think a lot of those kids would not have fallen through the cracks if it were any other year. And so therefore, you might see a school like Kansas State that's able to evaluate and kind of knows some of those less recruited areas, maybe pick up a couple of those kids and benefit from that. But like I said, I don't know if fans are going to appreciate that maybe the way that we do.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Really has. Hey,
Bill,
Randy, just a little bit. I just want to say thanks to everybody. Fascinating conversation. I've got one quick question. I just want everyone to kind of just lend their quick, maybe 15-second thought about the impact this has had on mental health and the idea of working so hard to try to get to a certain place in your athletic career only to have it be sabotaged or stolen from COVID. Just talk a little bit about what you think the athlete is experiencing through this and what it's going to take to keep these athletes ready to play and ready to get back out on the field. And just because you guys dedicate your life to this, I'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
I've got a little different perspective on this because I actually have a son who's going to be a senior in high school, who's being recruited a little bit to swim in college. And, this is obviously, we had some visits planned. We had some things we were going to do this summer that haven't happened, but all we've told him is everybody else is in the same situation. You haven't missed anything. It's not like there's a group of kids out there who is getting to do these things that you can't do. Nobody is getting to do this stuff. Again, it hurts the kids who maybe would have had their senior year, but the truth is, it's like that old commercial, right? Like 99% of us are going pro in something other than sports. I mean, yeah, it's a bummer, but if you can find a way to get into a school, like the reality says you're not an NFL quarterback. You're not an NBA player. So just find a school that works for you because there's somewhere you can play.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else want to just chime in on that? Just what your experience is talking to different athletes, how they've kept their attitudes, straight and stepped up? No one?
Well, I'll just say this. There's something, and I think it applies to recruiting no matter the year. But there's an old quote that I think, I would encourage any prospective college athlete to think about, and it's don't stress the could haves, because if it should have, it would have.